But certainly film production, TV production in general. Was that on your mind with the choice of Emerson?
Yes.
Okay, so that was something that was on your mind.
Well, in Harvard, you went to Harvard too, and then from the Lampoon, there's that direct line to SNL and comedy. It was on my mind because I couldn't really think of anything else I wanted to do. I would audit zoology classes at Harvard, and I'd go over to the museum, and I'd prowl around the Natural History Museum because the only thing that interested me other than cartooning was bizarre animals. So, and actually that saved my life a few times because my biology class at Emerson, we had to take one science class, and I slept late all the time. And my biology teacher called me and said, "You're failing biology, I can't give you anything but an F unless you write a term paper." So I went over to the museum and I scouted out weird animals, and I wrote a paper on the animals, and he read all these facts about animals he had no idea that existed, and he said, "Okay, B." And so I squeaked through, and occasionally I'd do the same thing with cartoons. I was going out.
I was going to say, Weird Funny Animals, another sort of one of the Paul Dini hallmarks.
Of course, yeah.
You learn more about weird creatures from Australia in just a regular sort of 18-page comic book.
Yeah, you do.
Than you ever thought.
They never wanted to know, yeah. But actually, one time I was in a philosophy class, and the class before me, there was this girl that I dated briefly, and then we broke up. It was really horrible. So I stopped going to philosophy class because I didn't want to see her walk out of the class before, because it was like ice, and it's like, I didn't even want to see her. So the philosophy teacher said, "Yeah, guess what? You're failing philosophy too." And it's like, my old girlfriend, I don't want to look at her. And he goes, "Well, you got to do something." And I was really not going to graduate that year, but it turns out I'd drawn cartoons for the school newspaper for 3 years, and each year I got 1 credit, and those added up to the 3 credits I missed. So, so I was able to graduate and give the FU to Lisa Cates and stuff like that.
We have a surprise for you. Lisa, come on out. So you're thinking. You're thinking beyond the philosophy and the crazy zoo animals. You're thinking writer. You're already on sort of that path at this point.
And what had happened was my father, when he was singing, he knew a DJ in Boston named Norm Prescott, and he started off as a radio DJ, and then he went out to Hollywood and he formed a partnership with Lou Scheimer. And if you remember Filmation cartoons, they had that circular logo, Norm Prescott, Lou Scheimer, at the beginning of Filmation cartoons like Archie and Star Trek and things like that. And at that point, it was around 1980, they were the kings of Saturday morning with Hanna-Barbera, and they had a lot of shows on the air, and I had a meeting with Norm and showed him some of my school cartoons, and he said, "Well, you're not an animator, clearly, but but some of the writing is good, so if you want to submit gags." So I sat down and I wrote gag after gag and short cartoon idea after short cartoon, and just showed that I had the mindset for that. And at the time they were doing the kind of crummy Mighty Mouse cartoons before John Kricfalusi did the really good ones about 8 years later. And so I sold some of those, and then I started.
Mighty Mouse was technically your first
Mighty
sale
Mouse.
product?
First sale was Mighty Mouse cartoons, and then it was Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, Flash, go back to Bill Cosby, prowling the halls, flirting with ink and paper.
I'm sorry, Doctor.
Sorry, it's not Doctor. Or something. Anyway, and so there it was. I sort of jobbed around town. I wound up working on Masters of the Universe when that got going, and it worked at Hanna-Barbera, Ruby Spears.
You did a bunch of Masters of the Universe.
Yeah. They started that off, and I was part of the crew that developed that, and they brought us into a meeting, and they showed all these plastic dolls, big bulky dolls, and nobody knew this was going to be successful, but I had a really good idea that this was really going to take off, and Lou Scheimer said, "You really think this is going to be popular?" And he goes, "Why?" And I said, "Because this is a huge wad of plastic, and imagine you're a kid, you really want to throw this at your brother's head, and it's really going to hurt, and for no other reason that you can really mess around with these dolls and lob them like baseball. I think it's going to be really popular." And he said, "Okay, I guess you can write a few." So I wrote a bunch of them. Tom Ruger, who I wound up working with later on Tiny Toons, wrote a few of those. Bruce Timm, it turned out, was upstairs storyboarding. It was his
So were you on staff there, or was it all freelance?
Well, it was
or sort of some nether region in between.
It was kind of the nether region in between. Like when Filmation had a show that they were doing for Saturday morning or syndication, they would staff up, and usually they would keep you working for the duration of the show. Masters of the Universe had a big order, so I think I might have been on for about a year. It was probably about 2 years in writing. And then I left to go to another studio and to go over to Ruby Spears where they were hiring and the pay was better over there. And the show continued on, and I think that's when J. Michael Straczynski and a few other interesting science fiction writers who were just getting into the game.
It's a funny place that a lot of people kind of ran through.
Yeah.
The universe. Yeah.
Well, Filmation was really interesting. It was people just starting their career, and a lot, if you look back on some of those, the credits, you'll see the names of young animators who had gone on to work at Disney and who are now at Pixar and places like that, and old-timer guys who had started off on Snow White and who were in their 70s and 80s and who were just looking for ways to continue their union payments and things like that. They had been, even some had been retired and they just came in and it's like, yeah, I'll slop out some storyboards and make some extra money. But there was really nobody in between, so you were either like 23 or 83. There was no 43. And Tom Minton, who's a terrific writer, has always said there was really nobody for the younger generation to learn from, because there was nobody right above them. There were the old guys who worked for Walt, and then there were the new guys.
The old guys wanted nothing to do with the young guys?
No, they wanted to go out and drink, so they were across the street having cocktails at lunch, doing what they used to do when they, grew on Fantasia. It's a staggering amount of consistency in an animator's life. But there were very few in-between people, and now we're the in-between people because other generations have grown up really embracing cartoons, so they all want to come in. So when I hear from somebody who's in their 20s who tell me, oh, I grew up on Batman or Batman Beyond or something, now I'm getting into the business, that's great because there's a direct line between myself and them, whereas myself and Tex Avery, who I met at that time, there was just like a 50-year gap.
And then somewhere right in there,
yeah,
you jumped to Lucas. Is that sort of my damn timeline,
yeah,
kind of ish, right?
That was around 83, 84. I had been jobbing around on the Hanna-Barbera and Ruby Spears studios, and then word came out that George Lucas wanted to do an animation continuation of the Ewoks and the droids that had been in Return of the Jedi, and was looking for ways to keep kind of that IP going, and also the merchandise and things where he didn't have to worry about Luke, Han, and Leia and the gravitas of the Star Wars mythology, and he could do these sort of spin-off characters. So he'd done...
Or probably the likeness, right?
Yes, there's that too. With the Ewoks, he had done a few live-action movies trying to put them in sort of more like a Wizard of Oz fantasy type, TV movie setting for kids. And with the droids, he said, it was interesting. I don't think droids was everything it could have been, because he had some interesting ideas, but beyond the first couple of creative meetings, he was off on other projects. But he said the droids had been around long before Luke and Leia got them. They've had many masters and they've had many adventures, and now's the time to do these sort of interesting stories about where they came from and the other people they've owned. And it's too bad that we couldn't actually get him to come in and write up some story outlines, because I think they would have been really terrific. And ironically, years later, when I worked with him on Clone Wars, he actually would sit down and write very detailed outlines, and he'd pass them off to the writers, or we'd get him on the phone, and he was really into it at that point, because he was kind of taking some downtime and really looking at experimenting with telling short stories. But I think at the time, it would have suffered because we were on Saturday morning, it was ABC, it was horrible restrictions as far as violence, as far as content, and so even if he had been writing, I don't think we would have gotten him as good as he was on Clone Wars.
The coolest thing that I remember you telling me was back then in your office.
Yeah. Well, the coolest thing is when you worked at Skywalker Ranch, it was very easygoing at the time, and they would let you sign out artwork from the movies to have in your office. So if you wanted a Ralph McQuarrie painting or two, you went down to the library or to archives and said, I'm taking the Cantina shot, and you put it in your office. Or I had the Cantina shot for a while of the aliens and the guys running for the X-Wings, the rebels, getting into the fight. It's a really good piece. And I had a Drew Struzan Indiana Jones preliminary poster, one that they didn't use, that was hanging over my couch. And I actually had a couch with a fold-out bed and a bathroom. It was great because, why pay rent in San Francisco when you can just live at the ranch, like the Phantom of the Opera? And the mummy, one of the mummy cases from Raiders was in there too, and the fertility idol from the beginning of Raiders, when Ian Bryce, who's a producer, had it sitting on his desk, and I inherited it at his office. And there's a fertility idol he's using as a paperweight, and, and it was great. And because all that stuff was around, and because they were so generous with allowing you to use it, to even think of like loading up the car and making off with it, it just seemed like, oh, I could never do that because they're trusting me with this. And it was just nice having all the stuff. And at the end, when I left, I gave it all back. And actually, George came over and he gave me a painting from the Idiot. Yeah, I know. And so, but he did give me one painting of the Ewoks, which I took with me. So that was he let me have that one. So
did you write mostly droids or mostly Ewoks, or you were kind of all over the place?
Mostly Ewoks, and I story edited on droids. We had gone a couple of different ways with droids toward the beginning and tried out a few writers. And then Nelvana, which was the production company in Canada, took over droids. And then I would step in occasionally and write or rewrite an episode. But early on, I had talked to George about Ewoks, and we were on the same level with things like children's stories and certain funny comics that we liked, and we said it should be more like this. And he's a big fan of Karl Barks and the Disney stuff, so we agreed it should be more like that. So I think I was a better fit on something like Ewoks as far as what he wanted to do with the concept. And Ewoks actually had the longevity because we did, I think, 2 seasons of that, whereas droids we only did the 1. And again, I know he liked animation and he liked experimenting, but but it wasn't like he really got into it once he did the show with Genndy Tartakovsky, when he did the Clone Wars shorts, and then he did Rebels and everything that he's doing now, because then he was able to really get involved and the restrictions were off. It wasn't so much violence that the networks had a problem with. We could always get around violence, it was tone. And that was the thing I've always fought with them on, is that we can't, they would always want to soft pedal things. Will the kids get this? Will they understand drama? Will they understand rivalry? Will they understand things like that? And that's what I butted heads with them the most on, because in Batman, it's all about tone. It doesn't really matter the gun play as much, and the violence and death. It's like, is there some serious intent? Is there some grief involved? Is there some joy involved? And Saturday Morning at the time was very middle of the road. Don't get anybody upset. Everybody's nice. Everybody's kind of like...
Never be surprised by a network's ability to want to aim as low as humanly possible.
Oh, yeah. And you have some good stories where that's good.
Well, it's just a matter of fact of this. And by the way, I think especially, you've been involved with so much, for lack of a better word, children's programming.
Sure.
That, I think when you think back on the great sort of children's programming, of which I would certainly include, Batman, Superman, and whatnot, it's the fact that it doesn't aim down for children. And by the way, I think the same is true of, great movies. It's
sure.
like children love movies that they can figure out. It's always a struggle, I guess. It's not sure.
Look at something like Zootopia. That hit on a lot of levels, and everybody loved that.
And you don't have to necessarily be an expert on racism to enjoy it,
right.
But it's there if you want it.
Right. That harkens back to things like Aesop's Fables and stuff like that, Parable, and things like that.
And so from Lucas to Warner Brothers?
Yeah, Lucas came to an end around 88, 89, and by then Warner Brothers was starting up again into full production. They'd been kind of dormant over the previous 20 years, and mostly doing compilation specials, taking the old Bugs Bunny cartoons and either doing some new bridging animation for specials.
Or they would do like a new introduction or a wraparound kind of thing.
Yeah. And then some compilation movies like Daffy Duck's Fantastic Island or Quackbusters or something like that. And then, but they really wanted to get back into full production. And part of the reason was Who Framed Roger Rabbit had come out around that time, and Steven Spielberg had been very involved with the movie, and that ignited his love of classic animation. And he really wanted to get into the classic Warner Brothers style of cartoons. He loves Daffy Duck, loves Bugs Bunny. And so they had started this idea of doing something with Looney Tunes. And then they thought, rather than have to compare ourselves to the classic Looney Tunes, maybe we could do new characters who were sort of learning from the old characters and still keep Bugs and Daffy alive, but sort of at the periphery. So that's where Tiny Toons came from. First it was in development as a movie, And then they started thinking of it as a TV show because they thought, well, there could be better places to take it. And also, let's experiment with the concept to see, how it's going to work. And
when did you enter into that process?
Well, I'd say Tiny Toons got up and running around January, February of '89, and I joined around April. So the show was already kind of up and running and in development. Gene McCurdy, who was head of Warner Animation, had hired Tom Ruger from Hanna-Barbera to come over and be kind of the creative head of Warner Brothers Animation. That was the birthing process where he had hired a bunch of writers and artists. And again, we had a very young crew coming in, and they really wanted to make their Red Hot Riding Hood or their Great Piggy Bank Robbery or all the great MGM or Looney Tune cartoons. And in some cases, it was a very rebellious spirit. In some cases, some of those writers and artists didn't last too long, and they went off and did their own shows, such as Ren and Stimpy or some of the Nickelodeon shows. Quite a lot of them stayed and they did Tiny Toons and then Tasmania and then Animaniacs and the other shows that Steven Spielberg was executive on. And I was one of the writers on Tiny Toons with Tom and Sherry Stoner and a few others. Bruce Timm was storyboarding with Art Patello, who's one of our directors. And Bruce has always loved superheroes, and he's always loved Mad Magazine and Wally Wood style drawing, things like that, and detective fiction. And so when Gene said they wanted to develop other Warner Brothers properties, particularly things like, well, they really had the Griswolds from Vacation and the National Lampoon's Vacation and
They thought that could be a cartoon, the Griswold?
Yeah, taking them around the world, and every place they went, there was going to be a different adventure, and even things like
watch that.
Yeah, let's take the Griswolds around the world, and then let's take them back in time, and let's take them to Mars, and it was like Abbott and Costello.
Play the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yes, exactly. Scooby-Doo, the whole thing, and which they would have done now. And then Batman was on the list, and Gene had this meeting.
I like to hear that Batman's like 40 down.
Yeah.
It's like,
Griswold's, Gremlin.
What's this down here?
Well, it was touch and go because we didn't know to what degree that Tim Burton would want to be involved with Batman. Can we even do it? He's got another. This was the time Batman Returns was in the works to come out. So once we got the clearance, we can do Batman. Gene said to folks, whoever wants to work on Batman, come up with some ideas. And I believe Bruce went to his office, and 10 minutes later, he had the model sheet drawn for Batman. Went into Gene's office, met with Eric Radomski, who was the background lead painter on Tiny Toons, and they worked up this really tremendous art vision for the show, which was Eric painting the backgrounds on black paper and Bruce doing the designs. And I wanted to get involved with it because I thought that was a lot of fun, so we worked on the series Bible together. And at the same time,
was that early art, like the design and seeing what that background, that fit in with what you were also thinking or what you were excited by?
Yeah, it was once I saw the art. Actually, Bruce and I had worked on a cartoon with Art Patello where we had taken Plucky Duck and dressed him up like Batman. We had done like the Great Piggy Bank Robbery type version of Bat Duck and things like that. And that had been a lot of fun. And we'd always go to lunch and everybody would be drawing, extreme characters and putting up cartoons around the office. It was a really nice environment at the time. So Batman started getting underway. I worked on developing the Writer's Bible with them. And then my deal was up, and I decided to leave for a while because I was kind of running back and forth between Batman and another season of Tiny Toons, and I'd gotten an offer to write a movie, and my deal was up, and I just said to Gene, I want to go write a movie, so I'll be back in a year if you want me. And she said, fine. So for about a year, I was off working on outside projects, and Alan Burnett came on to write to write her over the scripting on the show. Alan, are you here?
Yeah.
There he is. He's the guy who saved the Batman concept. Gene brought Alan over from Hanna-Barbera, and there had been some other writing teams that had worked on the show to varying degrees of success. Alan came in and sorted everything out, and then he wanted to meet with me to write some more episodes, so I came in and worked on a couple of the first episodes on Heart of Ice and Joker's Favor and a few others, and it was a lot of fun. So he said I could use you on staff, so I came back on staff. And around somewhere, I guess, toward the end of the first season or so, something like that, or about midway through or something like that. And then, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess the Mad Hatter one was the next one I wrote, and then it was a lot of fun. Then we settled into it, and the artwork started coming back in, and we had some production was done overseas, and some layout was done in the States, and you know, once we saw the episodes coming in, we knew what the show could be, and it was pretty cool.
I will get to the legally required questions about Harley Quinn in a minute. I just wanted to focus for 3 seconds on Heart of Ice.
Sure.
The little 3-second preamble was probably, that was the episode that, like, sort of my friends told me, you need to watch this show. And, like, it's not just a kid's cartoon. I don't know how else to express that. And it got me crazily hooked. I mean, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Was that, you know, sometimes with people, like, especially with Batman, because obviously you read it as a kid, and it was like, was that thoughts you'd always had about Mr. Freeze or something? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, some people like think a lot about, like, well, if I ever get a chance to do Wolverine, these are like 10 things I've always thought about. Or was it just in the moment, or from the art, or what do you know, just a...
Well, it was a lot of things. You know, when I watched Batman when I was a kid.
The girl from philosophy class?
No. Actually, yeah, she was pretty frosty. What happened was I watched the Batman episodes with Mr. Freeze, and I liked them because he had that sort of extra edge. He could actually freeze somebody, and whereas he had this cool weapon, and he wasn't like using a gun or gas like the Joker or something. And there was, and I also had a cast album that they brought out of Batman at the time, and I played it, and it had little bits of the soundtrack of the characters speaking. And
that was with Adam West and Burt Ward?
Adam West and Burt Ward, and they had George Sanders on as Mr. Freeze, and it's like, and he was very grandiose, and it's like, Batman, how does it feel to freeze to death? You know, and he's sitting there eating baked Alaska and watching Batman and Robin freeze, and he's making it smaller and smaller, you know, a little heated area, and they're going to be, you know, frozen as soon as the power goes off. And I like that. I like that grandiose, you know, the way he had of speaking. But at the same time, I was thinking, I thought later, he doesn't have a lot to him other than being kind of bombastic and having these big plans on freezing the world. And you know, I thought we had talked about making him emotionless, like emotion had been frozen out of him. And then we started thinking, if he is, then he's got to have a trigger. You know,
why is he emotionless?
And then we hit on the idea, okay, what about he tried to save his wife. And I developed some ideas around that. I talked them over with Bruce, and Bruce is a huge horror fan, and we threw out ideas like Dr. Phibes, you know, Vincent Price, and trying to bring his wife back to life, and, you know, the vendetta and everything. And so a lot of ideas sort of just coalesced in there, and the idea of how can we get this guy to an emotional breaking point? And when I started the outline, I thought, the thing I want to end with him crying, and I want to end with his tears becoming snowdrops, and him weeping.
That visual was sort of, you knew the end.
Yes.
And when you write, because I personally, when I sit down, I love to know, both when I'm thinking of a season, but also an episode. I like to know, like, my first scene and my last scene. Do you like to think that way when you're writing?
Yes, and then the big temptation is when I'll get a great opening scene, and then I'll think right to what's the end scene. And if I don't have an end scene, I'll wrestle with it a little bit. And if I don't get that end scene, I leave it. I throw it away. Because it'll only be frustrating. If I can't connect if I don't have the beginning and the end, then the middle won't be easy.
But if you have that beginning and the end, not that it's easy,
right?
Because it's never easy, but it does. You know it's there.
Yes, yeah. It's a roadmap. It's like, here's the start point, there's jungle here, and then there's the beach here. You want to get to that. And then along the way, you can change your mind, you can discover new things, and maybe it makes the ending stronger. But it's a good way to work. And another trick I have in writing is if I don't feel anything when I'm writing, if I either cry or laugh, then I throw it away because it's not. I'm not getting any sort of emotion from it. We had a 15-minute sign come up. So
no, do we really? I only have 10:36. Are we supposed to end not at 11? Is that how the process here? I do want to get to your questions. I want to ask one question that, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but how does it feel? Like you worked a lot, obviously, in the Batman series, and obviously with Heart of Ice, very particularly, they kind of made a movie where they basically took Heart of Ice and made a really, shitty movie. That's my words, not yours.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, that is the price of sort of playing with someone else's toys.
Right.
But it does seem like, and I'm not looking to, have you indict people you've worked for.
Right.
But you guys, lots of things which were taken from the Batman and Superman shows over the years, sort of like almost like willy-nilly.
Well, the way you have to look at it is when I was starting my career, I would hear from some old timers who had gotten very bitter about elements of their creativity that they had felt had been incorporated or that they had not in an ongoing mythology that they had felt they had never been credited for or that they would have liked to have done something with differently. And I didn't want to be that guy, and I'm plenty bitter about other things, but I didn't want to be bitter really about that. And
you felt you'd reached your bitter capacity.
Yes, that's right.
That's very important to a writer.
And I realized, okay, if I am doing something like a character of my own, like Jingle Bell or Madame Mirage or something, I'm solely responsible for that character's destiny. And I'm very happy with that. But with Harley Quinn or Batman or Mr. Freeze or something, I know it's like an ongoing mythology. So when I saw what they were doing with Mr. Freeze, part of me thought, that's okay. At least it gave them something to hang his character on, even if it was not done the way I would have liked to have seen it done, or if everything around it was played a little too much for laughs. At least that gave them something, and I'm fine with that because that's the deal you sign on for, is that you're playing with other people's toys.
It's probably a little easier when Harley is finally sort of brought to life.
Yeah.
It's kind of good, and it becomes it's sort of a little more enjoyable maybe when it's better.
Yes, it gives me a tremendous amount of happiness to see people enjoying the character so much. Like yesterday I did a 25th anniversary panel with...
Oh, I saw pictures from that.
Yeah, with Jimmy and Amanda, and all the Harleys were lined up in, male, female, transsexual, kid, all the Harleys were lined up in front of the table, all posing and everything, and then I dropped the table on them and killed them. 3 Harleys and a Joker, which I'm very sorry about. But I actually did I pulled the table back before anybody was killed. But it just to know that I had a hand in creating a character like that has gone on to mean something to people, I find it incredibly gratifying and also incredibly stimulating because I want to do that again. I want to create more characters. I want to get more things out there, and just to show that it's so much fun to do it and just do it again. And even if the character has none of Harley's appeal or popularity, it's just not going to stop me from creating new stuff because I really do truly love that. And then people can do what they want with Harley or Mr. Freeze. It's fine by me.
We will get to some questions now. Honestly, I had like 2 more hours worth of things I wanted to talk
about.
This is fun. But please, let's have some questions. No questions about Harley Quinn.
Everybody